Tourist killed after Malta's famous kissing elephant's rock arch collapses onto jet ski moments after tourist jumps from formation. A relaxing evening at one of Malta's most famous tourist attractions turned into devastating tragedy after the iconic kissing elephant's rock arch on the island of Comino suddenly collapsed, crushing a passing jet ski and killing a young tourist. Now let's take a deeper look and uncover every layer of this story on our AI
Imagine
podcast.
for a second that you are on the ultimate vacation.
Oh, I'd love to right now.
Right. You're cruising on a jet ski. The sun is just beating down. You've got the Mediterranean sea spray hitting your face, and you are gliding through this absolutely crystal clear turquoise water.
Sounds perfect.
It really is. And up ahead, rising out of the sea, is this world-famous, picture-perfect rock formation. You know the one.
Oh, yeah, you've seen it on social media 100 times.
Exactly. Or on postcards.
Yeah.
So you steer your jet ski right toward the shadow of this massive arch, and you're completely unaware that in a fraction of a second, literally just a fraction of a second, thousands of tons of stone are about to give way.
It's terrifying to even think about.
A sky is suddenly replaced by falling earth, and in an instant, paradise becomes a complete disaster zone.
It really is this terrifying collision of geological time and human time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
We look at a landmark like that and we just implicitly trust the landscape around us to remain static.
Especially when we're on vacation.
Right? Especially when we're in leisure mode.
Yeah.
But the reality is that the Earth is constantly in motion.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are looking at the really devastating collapse of Malta's famous Kissing Elephant's rock arch.
Yeah, over on the island of Comino.
Exactly. We've gathered the news reports, the timelines, and the ongoing investigations to really understand how a serene Saturday evening just turned fatal.
And our mission today is to explore that razor-thin, often totally invisible line between natural wonders and, well, hidden dangers.
Yeah, so let's start with the timeline, because the sequence of events here is incredibly tight. It's Saturday evening, right around 7 p.m.
So the sun is starting to get low.
Right. And a 26-year-old Chinese man and a 27-year-old Chinese woman are traveling together on a jet ski right beneath the arch. And at that exact moment, the arch collapses.
And the sheer volume of material that comes down is just staggering. I mean, the 26-year-old man is killed instantly, basically crushed by massive chunks of rock crashing into the sea.
It's so awful. And the woman?
The 27-year-old woman is severely injured. She's eventually rushed to Gozo General Hospital. Thankfully, her injuries, while really serious, were non-life-threatening.
That's a miracle in itself. But, you know, there is a detail in these reports that absolutely stops you in your tracks.
The American tourist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Literally moments before the collapse, a 32-year-old American tourist had actually jumped off the top of the rock formation into the water below.
And he was completely fine, right?
He was rescued by a passing boat, basically without a scratch.
Wow. Well, what's fascinating here is how that single detail completely changes the scope of the official inquiry.
The one being led by the Maltese magistrate.
Exactly. Because they aren't just looking at long-term geological erosion anymore. They actually have to investigate the mechanics of the trigger.
Like, did human activity actually cause the collapse, or was it purely natural?
Right, because in physics, any impact or sudden release of weight generates kinetic energy. Even the act of a human pushing off a rock face just to jump into the water transfers energy downward and backward right into the structure.
But wait, we are talking about, what, a 180-pound human against literally thousands of tons of solid rock? I know a lot of people try to compare this to a massive game of Jenga. You know, where you tap the table or pull the wrong piece and the tower falls.
Yeah, I've heard that analogy.
But that doesn't really capture the physics of an arch, does it? Because an arch isn't just stacked blocks resting on their center of gravity.
No, not at all. It's actually more like a drawn bowstring holding massive tension.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, that is a much more accurate way to look at it. Arches exist in this constant state of structural warfare.
Warfare?
Yeah, you have compression forces pushing down from the very top and then tension forces pulling outward at the bottom. The entire structure relies on the keystone area to properly distribute that weight down the sides and into the earth.
Right, so everything has to be perfectly balanced.
Exactly. And when an arch fails, it's usually because that tension gets too great and a microscopic fracture acts like a frayed thread on that drawn bowstring we mentioned.
Oh, wow.
Once it snaps, the entire weight distribution fails instantly.
And we really have to look at the specific geology of Comino to understand why that thread frayed in the first place, right? Because this is coastal limestone.
Which is incredibly porous.
Yeah, so you have this process called salt wedging weathering happening constantly.
Explain that for those who might not know.
So every single time a wave crashes or sea spray hits the rock, salt water gets pushed into the microscopic pores of the limestone. Then the sun bakes the rock, the water evaporates, but the salt is left behind.
And salt crystals expand.
Exactly. Those salt crystals expand as they dry, and they are literally prying the rock apart from the inside, millimeter by millimeter, over centuries.
And then you add wave undercutting to that, which is where the physical force of the ocean is just hollowing out the base of the arch.
Right.
And you have a structure that is mathematically doomed from the exact moment it's formed. Coastal arches are, by definition, temporary geological formations.
They're born of erosion, and they will inevitably die by erosion.
Right. So to go back to the American tourist jumping, is a 180-pound human enough to bring down an arch? On a stable structure? Absolutely not.
But this wasn't stable.
Exactly. If the microscopic bonds holding that limestone together had finally sheared to the absolute breaking point, then that tiny vibration, that minute shift in kinetic energy from a jump, it could theoretically be the catalyst.
That is just wild to think about. And I mean, when a structure like that shears off, it doesn't just shatter into pebbles.
Not at all.
You're dealing with monolithic boulders hitting the seabed, and that completely changes what happens next. When you read through the source reports, the transition from a rescue operation to a recovery operation is just harrowing.
It really is. The 26-year-old victim's body was trapped beneath these submerged rocks on the seabed.
Yeah, and it wasn't until Sunday evening that Army divers were even able to locate the body. And it's not like they could just swim down and pull him out.
No, because the environment underwater after a collapse like this is entirely chaotic. You are dealing with severely limited visibility, mostly because the chalky limestone dust has just clouded the entire water column.
Like an underwater dust storm.
Exactly. Plus, there are shifting currents. And most terrifyingly, there is the constant threat of secondary collapses.
Oh, because the rest of the cliff is unstable.
Right. When an arch falls, the surrounding rock face that didn't fall is suddenly stripped of its supporting pressure. It is left highly, highly unstable.
And the logistics of this recovery really highlight a huge blind spot for most of us, I think. Like, we look at an arch or a cliff, and our brain just categorizes it as scenery.
Yeah, a pretty background for a photo.
Exactly. We entirely forget we are looking at thousands of tons of incredibly heavy, unforgiving earth. Malta's Civil Protection Department and emergency crews, they couldn't clear this debris by hand or even with winches.
No, they had to bring in a heavy-duty, military-grade crane.
Just to literally lift the collapsed rocks out of the sea before divers could even safely recover the victim.
Which is an engineering marvel, sure, but a deeply dangerous one. Operating heavy machinery to extract submerged debris involves incredibly volatile physics.
Right, because of Archimedes' principle.
Yep. The loss of buoyant force.
Exactly. When a boulder is completely submerged, the water is effectively helping to lift it. Like a 10-ton boulder might only exert 6 tons of downward force while it's underwater.
It feels lighter to the crane.
Right. So the divers swim down in this perilous, low-visibility environment, and they manage to secure the heavy-duty rigging around this massive rock. The crane starts pulling. It's lifting 6 tons.
Yeah.
But the absolute second that boulder breaks the surface of the water, the ocean stops helping.
Precisely. In a fraction of a second, the buoyant force vanishes, and the full 10 tons of dead weight hits the crane's load-bearing systems instantly. It creates this massive shock load on the rigging. If the crane isn't perfectly calibrated, or, if the cable has any fatigue at all, it snaps.
And if it snaps?
If the straps shift as the rock breaches the surface, the boulder plummets back down. And remember, you still have Army divers in the water below who just secured that load.
That is terrifying.
A slight shift in the rubble could pin a diver beneath a shifting 15-ton slab. This wasn't a rock slide on a highway where a bulldozer could just sweep it aside. This required a synchronized marine, military, and civil engineering effort just to move the pieces of what used to be a tourist attraction.
Wow. Which naturally forces us to look backward. I mean, if moving these rocks after they fall requires military-grade engineering and risking the lives of divers, why aren't we paying closer attention to them before they fall?
That is the big question.
Because the sources reveal a detail that is just incredibly frustrating to read. There was a local kayaker, Michelle Attard-Tana, and she went to the local media after the collapse.
Right, I remember reading about her.
She stated she actually saw a visible crack in the arch, and not just the day before. She claims she saw this structural damage nearly 2 weeks prior to the incident.
2 weeks.
2 weeks! Yet there were absolutely no warning signs, no barriers, no safety notices keeping boats or jet skis away. Nothing.
And this raises an important question, right?
Yeah.
About the administration of wild spaces and the liability of governing bodies. I mean, when a private citizen can just paddle up in a kayak, visually identify a massive structural failure, and yet the authorities either miss it or fail to act upon it, it demands a massive reevaluation of how we monitor these sites.
But here's where it gets really interesting, at least to me, because I have to push back a little on the idea of just throwing up barriers everywhere.
Okay, how so?
Well, in hindsight, obviously it seems like gross negligence, but let's look at the reality of the location. We are talking about the open Mediterranean Sea. How do you practically fence off the ocean?
It's definitely not easy.
Right. Are authorities supposed to surround every single eroding rock formation with a giant perimeter of neon buoys and caution tape? If you bolt warning signs to a 300-year-old rock face, you're just turning wild nature into a highly regulated theme park. You completely destroy the very aesthetic that tourists travel thousands of miles to see.
You're hitting on the core dilemma of modern ecotourism right there. It's just insanely hard to police a coastline.
Yeah.
The logistical maintenance of marine barriers alone, I mean, you're dealing with tides, winter storms, saltwater corrosion, and just the sheer vastness of the area. It's a nightmare.
Absolutely.
And you are right about the ideological battle. Tourists flock to Comino specifically for the untouched raw beauty of the natural environment. They want the illusion of the wild.
But the counter-argument is that a human life was lost. So how do you bridge that gap without stringing up yellow caution tape across a pristine bay?
Well, by relying on invisible infrastructure. The failure here wasn't necessarily a lack of buoys. It was a lack of systemic, proactive monitoring of a heavily trafficked structural hazard.
Okay.
Because the technology exists to predict these collapses with a highly reasonable degree of accuracy without ruining the view.
Like what kind of technology?
Well, geologists use continuous LiDAR, which is essentially 3D laser scanning, to measure the widening of cracks in rock formations with millimeter precision.
Oh, wow. So they can track it over time.
Exactly. They can map a rock face in January, scan it again in June, and if a fissure has widened by, say, 3 millimeters, they know the structural integrity is failing.
You know, I was reading about acoustic monitoring for this too, which is just wild. Rocks actually emit high-frequency acoustic emissions right before they shear.
You do, yeah.
They literally sort of scream or pop on a microscopic level as the internal bonds break. Humans can't hear it, but if you have a few small acoustic sensors bolted discreetly to the backside of the arch, authorities can get a digital alert when a rock is entering its final stages of failure.
See, that's exactly it.
You don't need a fence, you just need data. If they had data showing that crack was actively moving, they could have temporarily restricted the waterway.
Exactly. And the fact that they didn't have that data is especially glaring. When you consider the location itself, this was a heavily trafficked site.
Incredibly heavily trafficked. I mean, the Kissing Elephants wasn't some remote hidden gem that only a few extreme adventurers knew about.
No, not at all.
It's located near St. Mary's Battery, which is an early 18th century artillery fort. It's right by Comino's famous Blue Lagoon, which is just synonymous with stunning turquoise waters and massive, massive crowds of people.
It's a huge tourist hub.
Yeah, people were kayaking, snorkeling, cliff jumping. The source material actually notes that videos taken prior to the collapse showed jet skis routinely passing underneath the arch, day in and day out.
Just another day at the beach.
Exactly. And the local adventure group, Outdoor Explorers Malta, they put out a statement expressing their deep sadness over the tragedy. And reading through it, it just strikes you how completely routine this entire environment was.
Well, routine is really the operative word there. Familiarity breeds a false sense of security.
So, what does this all mean for us? Because if we're being honest, every single person listening to this has done something similar.
Oh, absolutely.
We've all been to those iconic Instagram spots where everyone is doing something that if you stopped and calculated the actual physics of it is incredibly risky.
Standing too close to the edge of a cliff, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Standing just a foot away from a 1,000-foot drop at the Grand Canyon to get a selfie, or swimming at the base of a massive waterfall, or, jet skiing under an actively eroding stone arch. But because there are 100 other people doing it around you, your brain just completely switches off its threat detection. You assume it's perfectly safe.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, what you're describing is a psychological phenomenon known as normalcy bias.
Normalcy bias.
Yeah. Our brains are highly efficient machines, right? They want to conserve energy. So instead of calculating geological shear stress every time we look at a rock overhang, our brains just look for social cues to assess risk.
That makes sense. We look around to see if anyone else is panicking.
Right. If we enter a new environment and see a family happily eating sandwiches under an arch or 20 jet skis zipping underneath it, our brain registers that space as a proven safe zone. We completely fail to evaluate the physical reality of the environment itself.
Wow.
Normalcy bias causes people to drastically underestimate both the possibility of a disaster occurring and the severity of its possible effects. Because 1,000 jet skis have safely passed beneath the Kissing Elephant's arch over the past decade, the brain assumes the 1,001st jet ski will also be fine.
But the rock doesn't care about the last 1,000 jet skis.
Exactly. It completely ignores the slow, invisible, and just relentless march of geological erosion that makes every single pass inherently more dangerous than the last.
It creates this profound illusion of permanence. We project our human lifespan onto these monuments. We think, it was here when my parents visited 20 years ago. It'll be here today.
But to the Earth, 20 years isn't even a fraction of a blink of an eye.
The arch was dying the whole time. It had been dying for centuries. We just happened to be there for its final breath.
And that's why the kayaker's observation of the crack is so deeply poignant. That crack wasn't just a blemish on the stone. It was the physical manifestation of that final breath.
Yeah.
And it was completely ignored by a culture that prioritizes the aesthetic of the vacation over the volatile reality of the natural environment.
It's a really heavy realization. To recap the sources we've explored today, what started as a perfect, serene Saturday evening at one of Malta's most recognizable natural landmarks ended in a devastating, instantaneous loss of life.
It really is a tragedy.
A 26-year-old man was killed, a 27-year-old woman was severely injured, and a 32-year-old American tourist narrowly escaped what could easily have been a triple tragedy. And we are now left waiting on an official magistrate's inquiry to determine the exact mechanics of the collapse, like how much of a role that final transfer of human kinetic energy played, and how much was simply the inevitable ticking clock of natural erosion.
It's a stark reminder to all of us that nature is incredibly dynamic, utterly indifferent to our leisure time, and ultimately unpredictable, no matter how permanent a rock formation might look in our photos.
And if I can leave you with one final thought to mull over, consider those photos. Think about the thousands of tourists who visited Comino over the last 2 weeks alone.
That's a lot of people.
Thousands of people taking pictures, recording high-definition videos, smiling in front of the Kissing Elephant's arch. Without anyone realizing it, their vacation snapshots were actually documenting a disaster in slow motion.
God, you're right. If you collected all those photos from social media and lined them up chronologically, you would literally see a time lapse of that crack widening day by day, hour by hour, millimeter by millimeter. It really makes you wonder what other world-famous natural monuments are we currently interacting with, taking selfies in front of, that are secretly right at the invisible tipping point of their existence.
We're all just cruising on that jet ski, looking at the shadow of the rocks, completely blind to what's happening inside the stone. It definitely makes you look at the landscape around you a little differently next time you step outside. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Okay, one question for you. Could this heartbreaking tragedy have been prevented if authorities had acted on earlier warning signs? And should Malta now face tough questions over tourist safety at one of most famous natural attractions? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.